There's probably no work in the classical repertoire that is so shrouded in myth as Mozart's final composition, his Requiem, and the many fables that have become associated with the piece long predate Peter Shaffer's play Amadeus and the Academy Award-winning film it generated. The actual story behind the piece begins on February 14, 1791, with the death of the young wife of an eccentric count, Franz von Walsegg. A devoted amateur musician, the count enjoyed passing himself off as a composer. Wishing to memorialize his spouse, he had his lawyer hire Mozart to ghostwrite a requiem, which would be performed on the first anniversary of her death. Contrary to legend, Mozart's fortunes were on the rise during his final year. He was juggling so many commissions that almost 3 months would pass before he could begin composing the Requiem. What he was able to complete of the piece was written during a 6-week period leading up to November 20th, 2 days after the symptoms of his final illness first appeared. When Mozart died on December 5th, it wasn't poison, but the complications from a strep infection that did him in. His lifespan of 35 years corresponded exactly with the life expectancy of European males at the time, and his burial with 4 or 5 others in a so-called common grave was customary among the Austrian middle class. The mythology surrounding Mozart's Requiem started to develop soon after his death as a result of quite earthly concerns. Mozart had left his widow Constanza with a minimal estate and a variety of debts, yet she was far more intelligent and resourceful than her vapid, sexualized depiction in Mozartian lore suggests. She saw in the Requiem an asset that could provide at least temporary support for herself and her 2 sons, and determined that it could be financially maximized by implementing a 2-pronged strategy that involved a considerable amount of deception. Since Mozart had left the piece in an incomplete state, Constanza set out to have it completed by one of Mozart's colleagues and presented to Count Walsegg as a finished work by Mozart, thus fulfilling the original commission and allowing her to collect the outstanding fee. Mozart's manuscript contained the essential musical information for about 75% of the piece, including vocal parts, the orchestral bass line, and important instrumental cues. And in an age when attitudes towards music were prevailingly utilitarian, the idea of another composer arranging and adding to Mozart's work was largely uncontroversial. After being passed between various associates of Mozart's, the manuscript ended up in the hands of his student, Franz Xaver Süssmayr. Süssmayr finished the Lacrimosa, which likely included the last bars Mozart ever wrote, as well as the offertory. He also composed the Sanctus, the Benedictus, and the Agnus Dei, and recapitulated the music of the Requiem's Introit and Kyrie with the appropriately different text setting to fashion a closing communion. The whole work was recopied and then delivered to Count Walsegg, who had it performed privately on the 2nd anniversary of his wife's death. At the same time, Constanza determined that fully monetizing the Requiem required a public presentment that the work was Mozart's musical last will and testament, and that Süssmayr's role was merely that of a scribe who took down the master's final, frantic instructions before he was stolen by death. This narrative set the context for the Requiem's first public performance in Vienna on January 2nd, 1793, in a concert to benefit Mozart's widow and 2 orphaned sons. Other benefit concerts would follow, and the Requiem's publication generated further income. Since Constanza was a primary source for early Mozart biographies, her romanticization of the Requiem's composition was soon canonized, and the perennial Viennese affection for gossip and rumor sealed its legendary status. While modern scholarship has debunked most of the mythology associated with Mozart's Requiem, it's fair to ask if the realization that the piece was simply another work Mozart was writing on commission robs something from us. A story can be too good to care if it's false. But the demythologizing of Mozart's Requiem does turn us back to what's essential: the music. And it's in the music that Mozart's loss becomes most explicit and profound. The cathartic dissonances of the opening alone prompt us to wonder how Mozart's music might have evolved if he had lived a life as long as Haydn's and experienced the full upheaval of the French Revolutionary era, the musical earthquake wrought by Beethoven, and the dawning of musical romanticism. The tragedy of Mozart's Requiem is embedded in the music and the tantalizing hints it provides of what his art may have become.